Welcome. My name is Christopher Meyer. I'm the president of the Fort Bend Young Lawyers Association. The Fort Bend Young Lawyers Association and the Fort Bend County Bar Association are hosting its first ever joint CLE to discuss domestic violence through the lens of the power and control will, a tool used to assess the dynamics of intimate partner violence and identify patterns of abuse. I'm confident you will get something good out of this and be able to help your clients and your friends who may be going through a difficult situation. Thank you for joining me today. Okay, let's begin. If you're joining us online, you can go to my website and download the training material. It's the Power and Control Wheel, also known as the Duluth Model. Again, it's a tool used to assess the dynamics of intimate partner violence. It's been translated into many languages and shared across the world. There are different countries have slight variations of it, and there's also different versions of it. For example, there's also something called a religious power and control will. Those are for very more distinct sub-compartmentalized versions of types of abuse. But what we're going to discuss today is the Duluth model. Now, anybody here ever practice family law or family violence? Okay. Welcome. Anyone who's helped volunteered at a legal clinic or practiced family law or helped victims of family violence in the capacity as a legal professional, worked at a domestic violence shelter, or helped AVDA, an organization called AVDA's Advocates for Victims of Domestic Abuse. You've probably witnessed different types of abuse, whether it's physical violence, sexual violence, or emotional abuse. Most common types of evidence that somebody will bring to me will usually be text messages of threats, videos of an abuser being emotionally abusive. You might see pictures of bruises around on the face, around the neck, different parts of the body. You may have a situation where someone is being, their outside involvement is highly limited. Maybe an abuser is threatening to kill themselves if the victim dares to leave this abusive relationship. Maybe the victim is prevented or kept from getting a job. What do these things have in common? It seems scattered, and I know anybody who's helped victims of violence, you've seen these scattered facts. It's just a little bit all over the place. Different types of threats, coercive behavior, physical violence, sexual violence, using children. If there's a protective order in place, maybe an abuser is allowed to communicate with the children, but instead they're just using the children as a way to communicate threats to the victim. What is this all about? It's a little bit overwhelming at first, but things come into sharper focus and become more clear very quickly when you look at it through a special lens. And then suddenly everything's clear and it starts to make sense. What is this lens? The lens is called, it's the power and control wheel. So you have all of these facts in your fact pattern when you're reviewing a family violence case. And again, it's a little bit overwhelming. There's just little forms of abuse all over the place. But what's it all about? And how can we bring this gray area into sharp focus? So that's why I have the power and control wheel. It's a recognized model by domestic violence shelters, nonprofits, family courts, criminal courts, law firms. And when you start to look at these patterns of abuse through the lens of the power and control wheel, things start to make sense very quickly. It's about the narcissist or the abuser having power and control over the victim. That is what it's about. And they do not give up that power and control lightly. So let's start. We identified the why, and that's power and control. Now, you can think of the power and control wheel as like an onion. An onion has lots of layers, and you start peeling back the layers, and you start to see what's underneath and why they're doing these things, and then you eventually get to the what. That is at the center, and that's the power and control. But what's behind power and control? As a domestic violence lawyer, I don't represent I mean, I do not represent abusers. I don't need to. I don't need their business. I don't want their business. They can go somewhere else. I only help victims. And lots of times, if I'm dealing with an abuser who's unrepresented, who's pro se, it really gives me the opportunity to just really kind of peel back on what's going on and kind of peel back the layers of the onion. I get to that power and control, but still, what is underneath it? What is behind that power and control? And I know there's a lot of professionals here today who might not necessarily disagree with me, but they might want to supplement my thoughts. But what I see underneath is a lot of times it's fear. Their fear of losing something valuable, losing an important person in their life, and they feel the only way to keep and maintain that person in their life is not through a healthy relationship, because maybe they never learned what a healthy relationship looks like. So they use power and control. Okay, how do we have power and control over a victim? Well, that's where we're going to start. On the outside of the will is physical violence and sexual violence. Why is this on the outside of the will, and why is it in black and white? And this is not just my model. This is, if you look at power and control wills published by other organizations, it's always the same. The physical violence, the sexual violence is on the outside of the power and control will. And it's in black and white. And it's that for a reason, because it's more objective. It's easier to prove. If physical violence, if you can have maybe photographs of bruising, especially around the neck area, very powerful evidence. Maybe something the prosecutor's office might use, and I don't even get a phone call because the police are already handling it, and they're handing it off to the prosecutor's office. Those are slam dunk cases. Sexual violence can also be supported through, medical records, therapist notes, eyewitness statements, admissions. There's rape kits. There's different ways to prove the sexual assault. And there are medically recognized methods of determining if a sexual assault has happened. So sometimes when it comes to physical violence or sexual violence, I didn't even get a phone call, because the police department or maybe AVDA, Advocates for Victims of Domestic Abuse, they're already handling it. But sometimes, for whatever reason, the police department, they're not able to. The domestic violence department is overwhelmed. The caseload is too high, so they're just triaging the cases, only letting certain cases move forward. Possibly, I don't know what goes on inside the domestic violence department at a police station or in the district attorney's office, why certain cases move forward and some don't. I'm not, but I do get these physical violence and sexual violence cases. And sometimes it's after a victim's already gone to other organizations, maybe, for example, certain nonprofits that help victims of domestic violence. The way their funding is structured, they're only really able to help victims if the victim is indigent, like they have very low income, they're within a certain percentage of the poverty line in the United States. The United States Department of Agriculture publishes where the poverty threshold starts, and it's based off of household size. And just because you're below the poverty, or just because you're above the poverty line, doesn't mean you're not entitled to free representation. I know a lot of organizations, the way they're structured is you're allowed to be within like 180% of the poverty line. So you don't have to be like in poverty, but you're close. And it's based off of your income, your resources, and also your household size. So if you have a person who has a small household might not qualify for free legal services, whereas somebody with the same income but more people in their home and more people to support, they would qualify. But so maybe the victim has great income. They're not able to go to these nonprofit organizations, so they've already called everywhere they could, and then they come to my office, and I help them out. Now that's the physical violence and the sexual violence. It's black and white for a reason, because it's easier to prove. It's more objective. Now inside the will, everything's gray, and it's gray for a reason, because it's a gray area. It's a little bit more subjective, a little bit harder to prove. This is more like the emotional, psychological area of family violence, family of abuse. And when I'm handling my divorce cases, having proof of emotional abuse or intimidation, maybe one partner is asserting male privilege, treating the other spouse like a servant, acting like the master of the castle. The way the Texas Family Code is structured, that doesn't necessarily have an impact on the property division. It doesn't always get you a disproportionate share. The family violence, custody, property division, these are all different parts of the Texas Family Code. They don't always touch each other. So when a victim comes to me and I'm helping them with a protective order, and then I get them a great outcome, and then they want to help me with their divorce. The fact that there is a protective order by itself doesn't mean that the abuser will be denied access to their children. It's very hard to deny anybody access to their children. Even the word deny, I have my office is here, my paralegal's here. We all know we don't use the word deny in my office, because the Texas Supreme Court hates that word. There are opinions where the Texas Supreme Court will, limit access, an abuser's access, but not outright denied. It's very hard unless there's a termination in place or someone's been incarcerated. It's very hard to deny anyone access to their children under the Texas case law and the Texas Family Code. Oftentimes in the protective order, there's carve-out exceptions where the abuser can still communicate with their children through video. Unfortunately, the abuser, instead of asking the children, how's your day, how's school doing, I love you, sometimes and I've seen it, they communicate death threats to the victim through the children, and it's documented, and I take it to court. And I'm not going to say which way the judge rules, because there's a lot of circumstantial complexity here in these divorces, because the judge has to look at a lot of factors. Okay, so then physical violence, sexual violence, but now we're getting into the gray area. Intimidation. Intimidation and emotional abuse, I want to say, is by far the most common forms of abuse that I see in my cases. And I'm not speaking for all cases. I know there's some other family law professionals here, and a lot of them on Zoom right now. So I'm not going to say it's the only factor, but I'm going to say intimidation, emotional abuse are probably one of the most relevant. When I publish videos on YouTube about family violence, the videos that are more specifically tailored to emotional abuse, those just get more clicks than economic abuse or isolation. Isolation is where the victim is, you control what the victim does, who they see, who they talk to, what they read, where they go. Those victims, many times, and I'll get into them in a second, but their technology has been taken away amongst everything else in their life. They don't have access to these resources, so maybe they don't know, or they don't even know they're a victim, because the narcissist or the abuser who has power and control over them, maybe there's that fear, but a certain level of trust at the same time, because maybe the abuser is a provider, and the victim knows that the abuser will be a provider for the family, but at the same time, the abuser wants there to be a certain element of here, like don't cross that line with me. What happens there is it creates a certain level of submission because you trust the person, you love them at the same time, but you're afraid of them. So you're submissive. And that's what and so maybe somebody who has been isolated, they don't actually think of themselves as a victim. They just think this is how relationships are. And after reviewing the power and control wheel, I'm able to really open up people's eyes, and they're like, wow, I didn't know it. I'm married to a narcissist. I'm married to an abuser. Everything starts making sense. That time I lost my car keys, and then I couldn't find it. I was going crazy in the house. I wasn't thinking clearly. And then my abuser found the car keys, didn't tell me where they were, but found them, and then I got berated for losing them. I've been made to feel incompetent. This was, didn't know it at the time, but I was being gaslighted. So you don't even know you're a victim until you find out later, and you look back and everything starts making sense. Remember, there's a lot of circumstantial complexity here, a lot of loose, fragmented pieces, and we don't know how they all fit together into this grand puzzle until we look at it through the lens of the power and control wheel, and then everything comes into sharp focus. So intimidation. Making someone afraid by using looks, actions, and gestures. When people are fighting, maybe there's not always that physical violence because that's a separate part of the power and control wheel, the physical violence, but just the intimidation, getting into each other's faces, making each other afraid. Using scary voices, a lot of anger behind that, maybe certain facial expressions designed to make the victim feel afraid. Anyone who's helped victims of family violence, you've probably seen photographs of smashed property, dishes, kitchen dishes, family pictures that are in frames. Those things get smashed quite a bit. I have one extreme example is an intimidation tactic where I guess the abuser was trying to have leverage over the victim, but it didn't really work out in the end. But threw all the family personal property into the swimming pool. Intimidation, smashing things. I think that counts as smashing things and destroying property. It does happen, abusing pets. It does happen, and unfortunately, it's a way. Maybe if man and a woman are dating, and the woman has her little, they're in a intimate partner relationship. They get in an argument. She loves her little doggy. It's a world to her. It's like her little kid, and then the abuser makes the dog unsafe, does something to put the dog's life in jeopardy, something to make the victim afraid. That would be a form of intimidation. And the next one is displaying weapons. This is a pet peeve of mine. I know this is Texas, and I respect the Second Amendment, right to bear arms. That's fine. I would never tell people to not have firearms because governments in the past have been tyrannical, and we know we don't want that here in the U.S. So the Second Amendment is important. But at the same time, a lot of these firearms have been locked up for years, locked up safely. But then suddenly the victim and the abuser start having more tension in the relationship. It looks like she might leave and take the kids. Doesn't want her to leave. Things are getting tense. Looks like a divorce might be on the horizon. And then suddenly those weapons that were always been locked up are starting to be displayed, carrying them around the house. I had that at a protective order hearing one time. I pointed a weapon at each other, but when things are getting tense and it looks like there's about to be a divorce, suddenly someone's carrying a weapon around, or they're cleaning the weapons. I mean, let's get real. Those weapons have been locked up forever, and then you chose after she filed for divorce. That's when you decide or threaten the divorce. That's when you start cleaning your weapons at the kitchen table. To me, I see right past that. It seems like nothing illegal is being done. No one's pointing a weapon at each other. No crime has been committed. But as a family law attorney, that is just one more factoid that might seem irrelevant to some people, but I think it's important. Displaying weapons is, in my opinion, carrying a firearm inside the house. I think that's a power play. That's power and control. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's depending on the timing can be very suspicious. Okay, emotional abuse. Now that was intimidation. Now we're going to talk about emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is the most common. Again, if you look at my YouTube videos, the emotional abuse clicks hundreds, sometimes thousands times more than some of the other less pervasive areas. So emotional abuse, very common. And I'm not talking about emotional abuse that involves physical violence, just emotional abuse by itself. Putting someone down. When I'm dealing with child custody modifications and the parents are just not co-parenting and it's dissolved into insults, there's a lot of back and forth messages. It's for purposes of following a child custody modification, I need to show there's been some material and substantial change in circumstances, like somebody died, somebody got a job, somebody lost a job, someone's acting out at school, someone's in a relationship with an abusive girlfriend, someone's in a relationship with a sex offender, which is a big no-no in these child modification cases. There's thousands of material and substantial changes out there that could warrant a child custody modification, but in the absence of making direct threats of bodily injury or threatening to deny access, it's just insults going back and forth. Yes, it's emotional abuse, and yes, it's intended to make the other person feel bad about themselves, or even if the intent wasn't there, the impact was. Not always necessarily a material and substantial change for purposes of modifying custody, but again, it is another factoid in this larger fact pattern that I see, and it might seem not relevant, not important, kind of like displaying weapons if it's not in a threatening way. It's no crime has been committed, but just the fact that the timing of it is being done at during a divorce or custody modification, I still think that's power and control. So putting the other person down, most commonly, it's just text messages, voicemails, little things like that. Making the spouse, the partner, feel bad about themselves. And calling each other names, extremely common. There's so many names that I've seen that I would never repeat in 1,000 years, but it is designed to make the other person feel bad about themselves. So yes, power and control. And back to gaslighting. Does anybody here not know what gaslighting is? Okay, who here knows where the term came from? Okay. Yeah, it's an old movie. It's like a 1950s movie, black and white. Yeah, you get a free coffee mug. Come see me. Okay, so gaslighting is from like an old movie called Gaslight from like the 1950s. It was black and white. It was during the they had electricity at the time, but it was a film to depict an earlier era in time when people used natural gas to light their homes. And this husband, what he would do is he had a stay-at-home wife, which I think was common in that era. He would, when he left the house, maybe it was to save money, to save energy, save money on fuel. He would turn down the gas to the house, and the lights would become dim when the husband would leave. And then when he would come home in the evening, he would turn it back up, and his wife would swear up and down that it was very dark in the house. And he said, "You're crazy." He was clearly playing mind games, making her feel guilty, humiliating her. It's called crazy making behavior. and this is where we got that word gaslighting from. Is when you're gaslighting somebody, it's where you're manipulating them to make them feel bad about themselves, make them think they're crazy, humiliate them, and make them feel guilty. So, okay, we don't use gas anymore to light our home. So, what are some modern 21st century ways to gaslight somebody? And I'm sure a simple Google search would fix that. But I think one of like most common examples is telling somebody like I told you so. Like somebody makes a mistake and then you or they were never warned by their spouse not to go down a certain course of action. They go down that course of action and things don't work out. And then they're said, I told you so. I told you not to do that. And the victim swears up and down, no, you did not. But they can, the abuser, the narcissist, the person who's very manipulative, they will continue this and say, no, I did tell you. And, sparks an argument. Another common example, like I said earlier, would be hiding the car keys and then berating the victim later for losing them. It's hard to, it's almost impossible to prove the gaslighting, but it does happen. It happens a lot. And lots of times, sometimes victims feel like they're, like I said, crazy making behavior. And they don't realize they're a victim until they look back and suddenly they look back at the relationship through the lens of the power and control wheel, and they're like, oh, wow, I really was a victim. I just didn't know it. So very, very common. Now, this next one is isolation. That's where you control the victim, you control what they do, who they see, who they talk to, what they read, where they go. You use jealousy to justify your actions, and you limit their outside involvement. Now, this is Houston. We are a very international area, and we do have people and family and cultures from all over the world. A lot of people here, their English is not their primary language. It's not their first language. And maybe they have difficulty learning this language, and that creates a natural barrier. One possible example would be maybe someone is brought over here by a family from overseas, from another country where English is not it's not the second language, maybe it's a third language. It's just not something that they know. Brought over here, they enter into a marriage with somebody they don't really know. A lot of reasons why there might be these arranged marriages. And unfortunately, it's not always because of love. A lot of it's because of economics. And so someone brought over here, they don't really speak English, so that's already a tool that language barrier itself can be a tool to isolate the person from others. Also, and this is going to go, isolation kind of goes hand in hand with the economic abuse. And in a minute, I'm going to explain how this starts looking very close to human trafficking, a legalized version of human trafficking. When you bring somebody over here from overseas, they don't speak the language, they're not familiar with anyone, they're away from their family, they're away from their village. Maybe they're from a mountainous area where there's not a lot of technology, and then they come here to Houston where everything's 5G and you need your cell phone to survive. And of course, as part of the isolation, which is a form of abuse, their cell phone is taken away, which in the 21st century is a lifeline. That is how we communicate. That's how we translate. That's how we get answers. That's where we go from point A to point B. That's how we make an emergency call. It's how we notify our spouse that, hey, I'm going to be a little late. Can you pick up our kid at daycare? Or, hey, I'm getting off work early. I'll go pick up. I'll go do some grocery shopping. It's just how we communicate nowadays. We don't always use voice anymore. It's through texting. I mean, we need our cell phones. I need my cell phone for work. At my job, we use cell phones all the time. It's convenient. But a great way to isolate somebody in Houston is take away their phone, take away their identifying paperwork, take away their passport. And also, they also have that language issue. So they don't know anything. They don't know what their rights are, and they are basically reduced to slave. And we do know the 13th Amendment forbids indentured servitude. You can't just have, and I don't care if that person is legally married to their abuser. If someone's brought over here and reduced to being a servant, and they're forced to go out and get a job, and their money is being taken away, I think that's a violation of the 13th Amendment. It's a little bit more nuanced. It's doesn't always you don't always see it at first blush, but it's there. Um, People are kept as servants in homes, and it's happened. It's happened in I live here in Fort Bend County. I remember in my subdivision about 20 years ago, a a man was arrested for slavery. He was in violation of the 13th Amendment. He brought somebody over here. It was a servant. The person was a servant back in his home country. He thought he could bring his what he thought was his property over here and hold this person's paperwork. And well, fortunately for the victim, the legal authorities saw differently, and well, he went to prison. He had no real defense to what he was doing, but isolation does happen, and I do feel that I don't feel I know that goes hand in hand with economic abuse, which is where you can prevent or keep the victim from having a job, or you let them have a job, but you take their money, give an allowance, and most also very importantly, and not let them know about or have access to family income. An example would be, and we've seen this firsthand. Uh, a lot of these cash businesses. I'm not gonna specify what type of business, but there's a lot of business where you it's just you just pay cash for what you need. It's not uncommon. Just go to some of these businesses. You pay in cash. And the cash register is coincidentally broken. They'll never give you a receipt. But if you're paying with a credit card, well, suddenly you get a receipt because they can't get around that, but they can hide the cash. So we know it's out there, and these big cash businesses, all the family members are working for the family business, but they don't actually get paid. There's also some language barriers. They can be really taken advantage of. Interesting thing is when these cases turn into a divorce, these cases actually settle fairly quickly because the family doesn't want me to conduct discovery on the cash business. So usually I can just get the victim like a cash settlement. It was like, okay, fine, we don't care. The IRS is going to get you anyways one day. So as long as I can keep the victim safe. Oh, that's isolation and more of like also some economic abuse. Okay, other common examples of power and control would be, it's called minimizing, denying, and blaming. And I see this a lot. It's where maybe a narcissist abuses the victim and then immediately minimizes it and says, oh, it wasn't that serious. What I did to you wasn't that bad. Or they shift responsibility for the abusive behavior, saying, well, you caused it. Look, you made me do this to you. You made me have to hurt you. You weren't doing what you're supposed to do. I told you to take out the trash. I told you to do the chores. I told you not to talk to your sister. I told you not to, and I checked your phone history. You're talking to your mom again. And that goes into isolation, but also shifting responsibility for the abusive behavior, saying that the victim was the one who caused it. So it's minimizing, denying, blaming. I do see that a lot. An example would be, one example I saw where someone was minimizing was it was a custody case. One of the parents was being abusive to one of the children, but they were admitting to drug use because they felt that the only way for them to be present as a parent was they have to be high on drugs, because that's the only way they can be present as a parent. Because without being high on drugs, then they go into withdrawal and then they can't be present. It's just some weird, bad logic. And I'm also a court-appointed CPS lawyer. This would never pass the smell test with CPS. So, but this is what people do. They try to minimize and shift responsibility or justify their actions. Another one is using children. Oh my gosh, the examples I could come up with. Making the other person feel guilty about the children. An example might be if two parents, they're divorced or they were never married, but they called it quits, but there is a child involved. Maybe the child is special needs. Maybe the child isn't special needs, but they do require a certain level of medical care. One parent thinks the other parent is giving the children, like, over prescribing them, get what the children doesn't need, but withholding what the child does need. So when with the other parent, that the other parent wants to take a kind of slow down on that, but then they get quickly accused of medical neglect. And it's with the intention of making the other parent feel guilty. Hey, Gilbert, you let them in. With the intention of helping them to feel, making them feel guilty. Um, Using children to relay messages. Okay, it's parents should, under chapter 153 of the Texas Family Code, that's the chapter that discusses conservatorship, also known as custody. It outlines the policy of the state, which is that parents should share in the rights and duties of raising children, which involves sharing in the medical, dental, and educational decisions. And that requires healthy co-parenting, healthy communication. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. It's just too emotional, too toxic. So we have this thing called a co-parenting app. Most common ones are OFW, Our Family Wizard, App Close, Talking Parents. There's all these different apps out there, which theoretically are supposed to take the emotion out of the co-parenting process so they can just share in educational, medical, and dental decisions. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work, and they decide to pass messages through the children. Now, we are not supposed to disturb the peace of the children. I tell parents all the time, leave the children out of this. Just, you guys need to learn how to co-parent. And I remind them that if you guys want to fight, that's fine. But, well, it's not fine. But if you do decide to fight, you're going to have to go back to court and hire lawyers, and things can get very expensive very quickly. So it's better to engage in healthy communication. I'm actually really good at, and most parents want to do the right thing. So I'm actually really good at talking some sense with him, and for most people. But every once in a while, communication breaks down, and they start passing messages through the children. We had a case not too long ago. Threats were being communicated through the children. It's very unfortunate. Also, maybe we got summer camp coming up, and kids are going to go to summer camp. Parents need to share that information from parent to parent. That's called healthy co-parenting. If you can't do that, use the app. But I'm getting messages from my clients that they're being notified through the children. It's manipulative behavior. It's power and control. It's not. That's not the case in every single situation, especially with teenagers. Teenagers are cognizant enough they can communicate between the parents. They shouldn't, but definitely not with younger children. It could harm their emotional well-being. Okay. Oh my gosh. Next one. Using visitation to harass the other parent. Any family law attorneys here? I know we got a bunch on. Okay, yeah. Okay, you've seen that using visitation to harass the other parent. Maybe they were supposed to exchange a child at Buc-ee's or at a police station or at a park, and something happened, something got sparked, I don't know, and they just decided to start harassing the other parent. Maybe the one parent arrived without a car seat. They're supposed to have their car seat, so they borrowed the other car seat from the other parent, and they didn't bring it back. I could kind of see how that could create a tense situation. You have to be a little bit mindful about this and kind of see where people are coming from. But it could quickly escalate. I've seen situations where it's so bad between the parents they have to meet in a police station parking lot. Is it really that hard to just park the vehicles a few meters from you? You've got to pull up right next to the other person, kind of get into their personal space, and then you insult their new girlfriend, and then it turns into a fight. It's just, really, guys, it's a police parking lot, and now the police are coming out of the building, wondering what's going on. Oh God, these co-parenting situations are can be amazing. Yes, visitation, child custody exchange. That is an opportunity, unfortunately, for the other person to be harassed, and it's all about power and control. Um, Threatening to take the children away. Whenever that happens, I immediately recommend a temporary restraining order to put a geographic restriction on the children to keep them from leaving the area. That way, I have a legal mechanism to bring the kids back if I need to. It's through what's called a writ of habeas corpus, writ of attachment. These are all legal tools that I have in my toolbox to bring children back if they were taken away, if there were no previous orders in place. Now, if there are previous orders in place, I might already have a legal mechanism to bring back, but every case is a little different. I have to look at it first. But threatening to take the children, that's, oh my gosh, especially in the Houston area, we're a very international area, and it's not impossible to, get a child on an airplane at Bush International and go back, take them back home. Now I know there are restrictions on how the passports are to be managed, but I do tell my clients that if you want to get a child out of this country, you just need to find one dishonest notary. That's all you need. You just need one dishonest notary. And the greater Houston area has over 7 million people. And unfortunately, there are a few dishonest people here, and maybe some of them are notaries. It's not, if you really want to, if you're willing to lie on government forms, it's not impossible. And it's a very scary situation when someone threatens to take the children away, especially if it's a real threat and they do have a place to go overseas. Sometimes it's just, most of my cases is just parents, maybe they live in different counties, or maybe one of the parents living at their parents' house, and they just take the kid in violation of the order and just don't give him back. That's usually what happens. Usually I'm able to handle those fairly quickly, but it is a power and control method and a way to harm the other parent, make them feel bad. Weaponizing the children. Also, there's a lot of parents, they're threatened regularly, like, if you don't do X, I'm going to take the children away. It's very narcissistic. It's very abusive. And again, it's about power and control. Okay, economic abuse, preventing her from getting or keeping a job, making her ask money, giving her allowance, taking money, not letting her know about her have access to family income. That goes, in my opinion, that goes hand in hand with isolation, because it's about limiting someone's ability to have outside involvement. Having money, having an income, whether it's you're earning money because you work, or there's a trust, or maybe you're disabled and you have some kind of disability check. Whatever it is, that money is your freedom. That is your ticket to get out of a bad situation. And if your ability, and if you have no idea about the family income and that you're not given access to it, and any income you do earn is taken away, that is your money, is your avenue out of a situation. I mean, if I had $1 million right now, I could just go anywhere in the world for a long time, and but if I had zero cash, and I'm not going anywhere. That's just how the world works. And controlling someone's money is another method of power and control. I do know, Congress, there's within reason, but through their ability to print money and spend, they can actually, at some level, they can actually regulate people's behaviors. They can say, okay, well, if you're going to do this, we're not going to fund you, but if you do this, I know but perfect example is state of Texas. We get threatened by the federal government that if we're not going to comply with some federal law, then our road funding is going to go away. That is quite an abusive relationship to be in. But somehow we stay in this relationship with the rest of the government. Okay. Male privilege goes a little bit hand in hand with isolation or just maybe old-fashioned ways of thinking. When you're treating the victim like a servant, expecting them to cater to every one of your needs. Um, I think a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage, healthy partnership is based off of equality and treating each other equally and picking up the slack. I don't, defining roles in the house. Well, a man should only do these things, a woman should only do those things. That doesn't fly anymore, especially when you have little kids in the house. Both parents have to chip in equally, and it's not uncommon. Maybe one parent needs a break. They're a little exhausted, so the other parent has to pick up the slack. Don't expect certain roles and responsibilities in the house to be defined based on someone's gender. It's just not going to work. But unfortunately, that does happen. It's not as often as I don't see that like male privilege. I don't see it as often as emotional abuse, for example, because we don't really have clients coming to my house wanting a divorce because his wife refuses to cook or something. It's not because of that. Usually, it's because of other things. So I don't really see it as often, but I do. It does exist. Example, acting like the master of the castle and defining men's and women's roles in the home. Uh, Again, does happen, not as prevalent as other areas. And again, when I'm doing consultations with clients or talking about their case, it's usually the reasons for the divorce or the custody modification or the protective order is usually for other reasons. But this old-fashioned way of thinking still exists, and it is recognized. I know some cultures are more patriarchal than others. So I do know the oldest male in the family is kind of like the tribal leader for all the aunts and uncles and the cousins. They kind of make the big decisions for the family, how things are going to be organized. Um, I don't always see examples of them maybe abusing their authority there, but it happens. And okay, final one: coercion and threats. This happens a lot. Making and/or carrying out threats to do something to hurt her, leave her, commit suicide, report her to welfare, making her drop charges, making her do illegal things. These do exist. Making and/or carrying out threats to do something to hurt her. Example: revenge porn, aka I have these pictures and what I will do with them. And that's if every once in a while an abuser is dumb enough to put that in writing, and like a text message, and get a quickie restraining order. It's not very hard, but you can really revenge porn is it is illegal in the state of Texas. Personally, I don't think the punishment is severe enough because that is a direct attack on someone's dignity when you're sharing inappropriate pictures of them. I've called abusers as witnesses in the past, and I would grill them about this, and I would make sure that I know there's that whole thing about spoliation of evidence. You're not supposed to destroy evidence, but I'm in front of the judge, and the judge can tell me to stop, but they're not. It's like I'm telling the abuser, are you okay? Where's that video? Where is that video? Is it on the thumb drive? Is it in your iCloud? Is it in your email? Is it on your C drive? Is it on your phone? Like, are you deleting it? Are you deleting? Are you deleting it? And make it clear that if that video ever surfaces anywhere, I don't care who transmits it, I'm coming back to you because we know it was you who made the original threat. So don't have your friends release it on your behalf. No, I don't. I know it's about power and control, and that is. I am not going to let that threat go anywhere, and I will not let go of this issue until I'm confident that the victim is safe. Victims have committed suicide because revenge porn has been released. Threatening to leave the victim. I mean, I understand the relationships, emotions get tense, uh, but that is certainly a form of power and control. Committing suicide. On multiple occasions, I've had victims tell me that their abuser is going to kill themselves if the victim leaves. Now, if the abuser physically harms the victim to keep them from leaving, that's one thing, and the victim should leave. But it's a little different. The abuser is telling the victim, if you don't stay in this abusive narcissistic relationship and let me have power and control over you, I'm going to kill myself. I mean, suicide's unfortunate, but I don't sugarcoat it when I talk to victims. It's like that's not a healthy relationship to be in, where they're threatening to hurt you if you don't leave. I mean, they're threatening to hurt themselves. Like they're holding themselves hostage if you refuse to stay underneath, be subjected to their power and control and subject to their abuse. It's just a bad situation to be in. I say, look, I'm sorry, this person is obviously having issues. You need to get out of it, ma'am. And I can do that. Unfortunately, some people choose to stay in these relationships, and it's not just husband and wife or mom and dad. Sometimes it's a special needs adult child who's physically harming one of the parents, and the special needs adult is threatening to kill themselves 10 times a day, every day for years, and the parent feels trapped, and you got to make a decision. Now, I mean, I am a mandatory reporter if children or elderly are being abused, but if an adult comes to me, I make it it's their decision what they want to do. And I say, look, you have to make a decision on what you want to do. If there's enough evidence here to get your protective order, but you have to be willing to break it off with this person. I understand there's a bond, but there's also something called trauma bonding. That's where people are inseparable, are codependent because of the trauma they've been through together. A lot of, as I said, alluded to earlier, a lot of circumstantial complexity. Threatening to report it to welfare. That does happen. It's maybe a parent is receiving government benefits because they have possession of a minor they need to take care of. But sometimes that things aren't working out at that apartment, so the child goes and stays with the other parent, and the parent who's collecting benefits to technically report themselves to discontinue those benefits until they retake custody. But I understand with poverty here in Houston, money's tight. People aren't going to just go knock on the door at the Social Security office and say, hey, I don't have custody over the summer. Can you turn off my benefits? People don't usually do that, but the abuser could make that threat and say, look, I'm going to report you for fraud, waste, and abuse, whatever. It is a threat. And it's the purpose is to have power and control over the victim, make them afraid, make them be obedient to the abuser. Now, I have seen situations where abusers try to report like things to the welfare office, and the welfare office is like, just hang up, like nothing happens. But other examples, and this does happen under making the victim drop charges. Unfortunately, I've had multiple situations over the last several years where victims want to recant. It's too stressful going forward with the protective order. It's too stressful dealing with the appeal. It's easier to just recant and go back to an abusive relationship. I make it clear to my clients, I don't, if we're going to, I'm doing this for your safety. That's it. To keep the abuser from having power and control over you, and sometimes their life really is in danger. Like this person, there will be a murder-suicide. I've multiple videos on YouTube of back-to-back murder-suicides in Houston. I made some videos about what my thoughts and comments on what had happened, the facts that led up to the abuser losing power and control over the victim and going in and shooting the family. Protective orders are there for a reason, to keep the person safe. And I understand a piece of paper isn't going to necessarily stop an abuser from attacking the victim, but it can be a deterrent. And I am confident that, I mean, I can't prove a negative. I can't say I stopped something from happening in the future when we all know the future's never been written. But I am confident that there were some cases that were on the pathway of turning into a murder-suicide, and I was able to stop it. And it was, sometimes the victim isn't willing to drop the charges or recant because they really are in fear. The abuser, they've made up their mind what they want to do. And, you know, we've called the police in every county that's where we think this is relevant, and no one's doing anything. And I take it to court, you know. These cases can get very scary. Making her do illegal things. Unfortunately, when people are in abusive relationships, lots of times they lose agency and over themselves, and they need to. They're just subjected to the will of the abuser. They don't want to do illegal things, but they're forced to. Sometimes it could be anything: selling drugs, risky sexual behavior. I think the sky's the limit, but that is a form of power and control. If you can get your victim to do something illegal on your behalf, that is certainly power and control. Okay, so that's I've gone through the entire wheel of power and control wheel. That's been an hour. At this time, are there any questions? And Goldberg, if you want to, if somebody has a question on Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll do our best to answer your question. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Okay. I did do a podcast interview not too long ago with a law school friend of mine named James Hernandez. Do you know James Hernandez? Yeah, he's a friend of mine. We were in the same class in law school. I did a podcast interview. We discussed the interplay of VAWA, Victims Violence Against Women's Act, and how that interplays with state law, like the Texas Family Code, and also the impact on their status under federal immigration laws. Now, it is true that you can use their immigration status as a way to control the victim, control their behavior. And yeah, I've had it's not immigration fraud. It's like legitimate violence. They come to me, they get their citizenship, and they need a divorce, and it's they're coming in good faith. Uh, every once in a while, I'll have a divorce where someone here is on some type of visa, and the family is asking me how to get this deported. Um, I don't really have a clear answer for that. I could say, well, based on the facts of the case, maybe I can get you some kind of restraining order showing. I mean, I don't think it's enough to get a protective order, but I look at the facts like I think I might be able to get you a restraining order. Uh, you can show it to the immigration officer and show them that they're not doing what they're supposed to do here in the States. That might affect their immigration status. It might have the impact of having them deported, but that's not really something my office is able to do. All I can do is give you an order from a state court, like a divorce decree, a protective order, a restraining order, mutual injunctions, something signed by a judge. And all I can say is I will give it to you, and you can go show it to USCIS and let the immigration officer decide what to do. That's all I can. I mean, I don't have the ability to get anybody put into an ICE facility.
But chances are, in the beauty of the law, if there is a minimum that ability of them to stay there, it still are and in addition to the thing. Part of the education.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Okay, like for example, let's just say a divorce. Okay, there's been some family violence, domestic abuse. There's no, the victim comes to me and says family violence has occurred. For purposes of this question, I'm gonna say there's no elderly people are being abused, no children being abused, and someone comes to me and said they've been harmed. They don't have any evidence, they don't have photographs, they don't have videos, but you know, I believe them. I believe them. That's not the issue. But I asked them, okay, is your spouse going to hire a lawyer and fight this? And they say, oh yeah, they're going to spend as much money as they can to fight this. Well, it's we can still move forward on the case. That's fine, but here's the problem. This is a civil case. It's civil in nature. It's not a criminal matter. We have Party A saying something happened. Party B is going to deny. There's no evidence to serve as a tiebreaker. But I mean, I believe the victim. That's fine. But the problem is when we go into the courtroom and I present my argument, and then they present their argument, and it's what this person said versus what this person is denying. You know, and the judge may grant it. They might grant a short protective order, possibly. Might just deny it at all and just say both of y'all need to stay away from each other. I've seen those too, where the judge says, "Look, I'm not granting this, but you guys need to stay away from each other. And if I want you to understand, if you come near that person again, there will be police involved. You know, that kind of thing." Um, the judge knows that something happened, but it's not. I want to say it rises to the level of like a protective order, which you have to prove family violence. Now, so somebody comes to me, and okay, so we'll say no physical violence, but there's been like emotional abuse, economic abuse, and it's provable. Now, that's not going to necessarily get you a disproportionate share in the divorce all the time, but what I can do other things depending on the facts of the case and what evidence they present to me. Like the spouse saying if you know, I'm going to stop paying the bills at the house. I'm going to leave and stop paying the bills at the house. I'm going to turn off. I'm turning off the water tonight. I'm turning off the electricity today. When they're sending those threats, uh, that's perfect for getting a restraining order because when you file for divorce, you can request what's called mutual injunctions and, if necessary, a restraining order to preserve. Purpose of the restraining order and the mutual injunctions is to preserve what's there. It's to maintain the status quo. It's also protect the peace of the children from being disturbed. So if someone is making those threats, we can just go ahead and file for divorce, request what's called mutual injunctions. It's just these standing orders the courts grant all the time. And it's a great way to quickly regulate the behavior of the parties. Lots of times when I have like young couples, they're just fighting, you know, there's like young couple with young kids, not a lot of money, just a lot of credit card debt, you know. I just tell them like, hey, we got these mutual injunctions in place and I can file an enforcement on these if you don't comply, you know, and, you know, they get scared and say, okay, well, we're just going to start acting like adults, like we're supposed to. And when in fact it's just the mutual injunctions, I think it's like a baby restraining order. It's something that gets issued all the time. I could file an enforcement based off of the mutual injunctions. It's very rare that I have to. Normally, most people they look at the mutual injunctions like, oh, this is reasonable. No threatening, harassing, obscene, vulgar behavior. Not allowed to repeatedly call your spouse at odd hours with the intent to annoy or alarm. Not allowed to do anything that would disturb the peace of the children. They're like, okay, it's reasonable. It's a two-way street. It's joint and mutual. So like, okay, I like this. You know, most people comply because they want to do the right thing. And the mutual injunctions is something that I give actually to both of them and say, look, this applies to everybody. So y'all need to calm down. And it usually works. Now, if it gets a little too intense, like one person's threatened to release revenge porn, I'll file like an immediate restraining order. And usually they're dumb enough to put that threat in writing, like a text message, and maybe they even screenshot part of the video. And like it's pretty clear they're making a threat. You know, that's something I could quickly attach to a restraining order, and yeah, the judge will sign it. Now, yeah, protective order is a little bit more serious, but that's kind of we started getting into the black and white area, the power and control will. The gray area is where more like restraining orders and mutual injunctions come in place. It just kind of regulate the behavior of the parties. But that's what I do. If someone's coming to me and there's a risk of irreparable harm, and I know it's something that would go against mutual injunctions, and we don't have time, then yeah, quick restraining order. And sometimes, you know, I call the abuser. I'll go ahead and file a restraining order, enjoining their behavior to stop them from this harassing behavior. If they're not represented, you know, I'll pick up the phone and say, hey, I filed a restraining order. You need to stop this right now. I mean, I just filed it. I mean, I never said it got signed. I'm still waiting. But I never lied to anybody. I just said, hey, I filed a restraining order. You need to stop this. And usually they get a little scared and they'll stop. And I'm not trying to be a bully to anybody. I'm really not. I'm just doing the minimum to get the abuser to stop so we can move forward and hopefully have an amicable divorce. And the other good news is if they do make the threats, I show those, like they make those threats and I document, and it's documented. The victim is scared because they're like, oh, all these threats, you know, it's going to be a stressful, horrible divorce. So it's like, no. All these threats, this documented, that's actually helps me to get the case settled because I show this to them at mediation. I don't want that to go in front of the judge. We're going to settle at mediation. We'll get you divorced. Don't worry about it. So any other questions? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Oh no, all the time. On my website, chrismurraylawfirm.com, I have a huge resource list. Whenever I'm doing protective orders, usually sometimes it's the court, they'll kind of give me a list of resources, or I'm researching something and I find a nice list of resources. I scoop up all that information and it's not confidential, it's just a list of resources. I put it on my website. I refer to them all the time. Um, most of the time, if someone's being, physically attacked or like sexually assaulted, they call the police first. And many times the police are able to help them. If for some reason the police are not able to, they can go to these nonprofits like AVDA. And I'm not speaking on behalf of AVDA. I think it's a great organization. They get a lot of great donations. So don't quote me, but it's my understanding that a lot of their funding is structured based off of means testing, meaning that if someone if someone a billionaire comes to AVDA saying I need a protective order, AVDA says no, you need to go private, you need to go hire somebody. But if somebody is indigent and they're at or near the poverty line and they are a victim of abuse, and there's no way in this universe that they can hire a lawyer, and there's also some language barriers. AVDA has the funding to help them. So, but sometimes if AVDA is like, yeah, I'm not speaking on behalf of AVDA, but sometimes if, or these other nonprofits, because sometimes if someone has lots of assets, uh, they might be told that the nonprofit is backed up and we might not be able to get to your case as quickly as you like. That's the answer they might get. And then they have to go hire private pay a lawyer and get quicker results. But if someone comes to me and they're truly indigent, um, I will. I do have a few cases at my law firm that we keep some victims under our wings, even after the point where they're not really able to pay us anymore. We're not going to throw anybody out into the cold unless we're confident that they're safe. But unfortunately, I can't do that for everybody. So I do, if they're indigent, we're not going to just hang up the phone on them. We'll tell them, like, hey, go to this resource over here, give it a shot. Go to my website. There's some resources like APTA would be the most common example because they have great funding. So we do point them in the right direction. We do have the Fort Bend Women's Center. They do have housing for battered women. These women, if they're going to be in the housing, they have to follow the rules. There's like don't you're coming to them because you're getting away from the abuser. You don't go back to the abuser. It's just a lot of you have to follow the rules over there in order to use the services. So a lot of times it's not about the money. It's also about the victim not going back to the abusive relationship. But yeah, we point them in the right direction. Sir?
I have one for network few guidelines. Trying to get them on. This won't happen. Some kind of
Not the immigration documents where they promise to support the person they're bringing here. I mean, I would love to learn more about that. It sounds like a great tool. Now, if the case actually goes to trial, and a lot of these cases do go to trial because maybe the narcissist doesn't want to support, or they just refuse to pay child support or whatnot. Um, I think that's something I could show to the judge to get them to lean in their favor. But I mean, at the end of the day, if the judge sees that one person is the custodial parent and they don't have the means and they need the child support, I'm confident it would be granted. Now, if they decide to disobey the order, which is also common, and I tell parents that all the time, is like I can get you an order from the court ordering this person to pay child support. Now, whether or not they decide to pay child support, and whether okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can see how this mail order bride coming to the United States, how she could feel isolated and being in an abusive relationship, and she has to, she wants to get her status, her immigration status to a certain level, and sometimes she feels she has to stay in an abusive relationship. I'm very, again, this goes to the circumstantial complexity of family law, of why people stay in abusive relationships. And it's also the same reason as if somebody wants to get out of a relationship, that's fine, I'll help them. But I'm not, if you come to my office and we do a restraining order or a protective order and you have to sign an affidavit saying that so-and-so hurt me, and we get you the protective order, and then later down the road, a few months later, they decide, oh, I'm going to recant. I'm just going to say, oh, all that stuff I said in the affidavit didn't mean it. No, no, I don't vacate protective orders. If you come to me for something, we're moving forward on that information. If you want to vacate it or remove it later, you're going to probably have to talk to somebody else. And I did talk to the state bar ethics hotline about that, and I'm not incorrect. What year was this roughly? What year was this? What year was this roughly? No, I'm sorry. Right now, Russia's not the place to go at this point. Yeah, right. How to enforce that, like following enforcement based on the document, I want to know. I mean, that's kind of outside the family code, but I could see how it could easily be used as evidence. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I would just show it to the. I would. I would show it to the judge as an exhibit and just say, look, he agreed to support Your Honor, and then let the judge take that into consideration along with all the other factors. Yeah. But like actually filing an enforcement and threatening jail time for, I don't know if I could do that. Okay.
Well, that was your wrong.
Okay. Any other questions? What's up? Yeah. What's up?
Overwhelming majority of spouses pending and divorce claim that our spouse is using. Whether you're rushed, a lawyer is reading this, the decision.
Okay, no, narcissistic personality disorder is, yeah, it's a medical condition that requires proper diagnosis. Now, in family law, when you have two parents, two partners, two spouses, it's not working out, it's common to make the accusation that this person meets the criteria of narcissistic personality disorder. Now, is that a formal medical diagnosis? No, but and again, I'm purpose of the CLE is to help people identify patterns of abuse on what would be typically symptomatic of narcissistic disorder. Also, give us better insight into the dynamics of uh, intimate partner violence. So yes, it's for people narcissists. Yes, I see it all the time. Am I qualified to diagnose them? No, but I don't think it takes I'll be honest. I don't think it takes it doesn't take a medical degree to figure out if someone is being emotionally abused or intimidated or subjected to economic abuse or being prevented from getting or keeping a job. I mean, these are common sense things. But in terms now, if we went to court and I use the word narcissist, I probably wouldn't, like, if I'm calling somebody as a witness, I probably wouldn't call them like, "Are you a narcissist?" Uh, because their attorney can make some objections. as that, not we're not a qualified, or the spouse is not a qualified expert to make that diagnosis. And I can see the judge sustaining those objections. So outside the courtroom, can you make the accusation? Yeah, but will it fly inside the courtroom? Probably not. The judge would probably sustain an objection, saying that the person who's making the accusation lacks the proper qualifications. But at the same time, I think the judge can use common sense and look at the evidence and be like, okay, well, I think this guy probably is an abuser, probably is a narcissist based off the evidence, but there is no clear medical diagnosis. But the judge doesn't need a medical diagnosis every single time to protect the victim. So I'd say it's moot. Any other questions from the? Oh yeah, the CLE number is on my website. And if you need it right now, give me 1 second. Just go to my website, go to the events page, go to the CLE. The CLE is 1742-37275, and we'll share that in the chat. Okay. And also, if you're an attorney, I ask that you self-report your hours, please. CLE is on my CLE numbers on my website, like I said earlier. All right, cool. Thank you for coming. I really do appreciate it.